and it's printed on both sides. So you'll notice on one side is pretty full, and it covers the first 6 verses. Let's start out with that, because when you turn to the back side, it starts with verse 5. Now turn to the back side right now, and you'll see there that all you have is just a list of names. But this is what I told you I'd give you last week. All these lists of names fit in to these verses, but none of them are mentioned in the Bible. The reason I'm doing this is because I want you to know that historically we can see how each one of these verses fits into history and who the person was that's being talked about in that particular verse. Now, I need to make a disclaimer at the very beginning. I'm not going to give you a history of Persia and a history of Greece. That would take forever, and I just want to make this a Bible study. What I'm doing here is just simply wanting to verify that everything the Bible says that's going to happen historically, indeed did happen historically. And when you read history, if you like to go back and read about the Medo-Persian power and the Greek power and the Roman power, you'll find that every one of these names will fit into history, and each one will be talked about in the 11th chapter and some in the 12th chapter of Daniel. So this is going to lack a little interest. It's going to be hard for me to make this lesson interesting to you today, but I hope it'll be helpful to you. If I can't make it interesting, I just want it to be helpful to you. I want us to realize that though this is a difficult passage of Scripture, it is one of the more important passages of Scripture in all the Bible. And, one of the things that I wish that people would be willing to do is to think when they read the Bible. Some parts of the Bible, honestly, are not easy. They are really hard. And sometimes people, because it doesn't click with them just like that, say, well, I can't understand that anyhow, so. And I can't tell you the number of times in my ministry that I've talked to individuals and said, well, I just quit reading the Bible because I just can't understand it. I can understand the fact that they don't understand it, but I think that's really sad. And I think there's so much we can understand that will keep us busy for a lifetime, so we shouldn't lose any sleep over what we can't understand. But the more we understand what we can understand better, the easier it's going to be for us to understand what we have great difficulty in understanding. And so I really appreciate the patience that you've had in going through the study of Daniel. And I hope that you don't get lost in all the detail that we're going to talk about, and I'll try not to mention too much of that, but enough of it to help us realize that this does have an explanation in what actually happens. I think that a lot of people who don't really take the Bible seriously make a big mistake by not at least looking at what the Bible has to say. For example, when the Bible talks about a river, is there such a river? Well, we've, in this study of Daniel, come to a river that's named. The name of it is Tigris. It's called the Great River. Is there a Tigris River? There's a Tigris River today. And it's the same place it was back in Bible days. So when he's talking about things that are geographic and you can see them on your map, it's worth looking at the map. And I wish that this church had some big maps, but they don't. And, I'd probably be the only one who uses them if we did have it. But there are a lot of things that, I'm starting this class all over again on Wednesday nights, and they have an overhead projector. So I'm making some graphs to use on the overhead projector. And I started out, my very first lesson in Daniel said, here is the map. And I wanted them to see exactly where these countries of the world are. And when I was able to say, this is Iran, this is Iraq, they say, yeah, we get that. And here's Syria. I said, okay, now do you realize what were in those exact same places back in Bible days? Well, where you have Iran today, put Persia. And where you have Iraq today, put Babylon. And where you have Asia Minor today, put Turkey. You know, so a lot of these stuff, now Egypt's the same place. Don't have any problem with that. And Greece is the same place. But some of these others have changed. Syria has stayed pretty much in the same general area as it is today. But sometimes if we can see something, it really helps us out. So as we go along, if you have any problems, stop me and I'll do what I can, but I'm not going to be able to give you a whole lot of the details of history. But have this page that has the most written on it open to start out with, and then after we get through first 6 verses, we'll go back. Now, this part that I've handed out to you is really going to answer all the questions in the first 6 verses, but we're going to look at the questions and make sure we have the correct answer to it. Well, let's pray as we get started. Father in heaven, we need your help as we study this passage of Scripture. We're so grateful that you have spoken prophetically with such tremendous accuracy. And help us to appreciate that what you've done in Daniel, not a person alive could begin to do, and yet you've done it. And here we are, many centuries later, reading about it and benefiting by the results of what you said to Daniel that he would never live to see come to pass. And yet we who have lived many years since can read history and see that it did happen precisely as you said it was going to happen. And yet you did it without men knowing that they were fitting into your plan, and yet they were. And I pray that today, somehow, we might realize that every one of us in this room is fitting into your plan. And we may not fully realize just exactly how we are fitting into that plan. But you've made it so clear throughout history that everyone does fit into your plan in one way or another, either for you or against you, either helping you or trying to hinder you. Help us to so live, according to what we do know, that we will fit into your plan in a very positive and meaningful way, so that we will be the bright lights that you intend for us to be in this dark world of sin. So guide us in our study, I pray in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. All right, chapter 11 is very specific. And in this chapter, we're going to see prophecy as it's given. It's going to cover a tremendous period of time. Actually, probably all the way up to 70 A.D. So we're toward the end of Daniel's life. Remember, he was carried in captivity about 606 B.C. So we're going to cover 600 years left in the Old Testament, plus into the first century of the New Testament. All right, verse 1. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. This verse was discussed at the end of chapter 10. So we talked about this last week, but I want to make a few more comments today. Notice I've written down for you, the angel sent to explain Daniel's dream relates what he has done in the first year of Darius, when Babylon fell as God had predicted. Angelic forces were at work then to make certain that the 70 years of captivity would end, and that Persia, who set the captives free to return to their homeland, to begin rebuilding their temple and their homes and the city of Jerusalem. Now this is what he's talking about. In other words, were there difficulties back at this period of time? Yes, there were. Let me give you an example of the kind of thing that the angelic world really stepped in and played a very important role in. Going back here to the first year of Darius the Mede, did Daniel have an exalted position in the Persian government at that time? Yes, he did. Along with how many others? Two.
Oh, two.
Two others. So he's the third one. Now, what happened in the relationship of these other two with regard to Daniel?
Daniel was put ahead of them.
Yes, does that oftentimes do with those who are subordinate? That's exactly right. And the jealousy played such a role that they decided, we've got to get him. How did they do it? Well, how did they get him to the lion's den?
Because of his praying.
That's exactly right. How many times did he pray every day?
3 times.
Was he ashamed to be seen or heard praying?
No.
No, he was not. Just because he knew that things were not particularly good with his fellow workers, that didn't keep him from living for Christ. Should we, in a pagan surrounding, ever be embarrassed to stand up for our Lord? No, we should not. But I submit to you, some people probably don't pray publicly in a restaurant because they are afraid of what all these other people are going to think. Folks, that ought to be the least of our concern. This is the food God has provided for us. We're giving thanks for it. If people hear us or see us, whatever the reaction may be, so be it. I remember one time, it happened more than one time, but I think of one time in particular, since I've lived over here, we were eating out and had a prayer, and a person came up to me after it. You don't know how that blessed me. I thought, what are you talking about? He said, I heard you praying. And I thought, okay, that tells me a lot about that person. They observed, and they got a message from it. And maybe it was encouragement. I don't know what the message was. But maybe they're thinking, hey, he wasn't afraid to do it. Why should I have been? And so they realized this is something we all have to do. Well, Daniel did get in trouble, you know. They had the king sign a decree and seal it so that it could not be revoked. And so Daniel's put in the lion's den. Now, what the king did not know, and what Daniel did not know, is that the angelic forces were working. And they're behind the scenes doing a lot of things that the people in the earthly realm are not aware of. Is that same thing going on today?
Sure.
Yes, it is. Now, remember what we cited last week, that in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12, when he talks about where we put on the whole armor of God, he said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities and powers, rulers of darkness. Now, are we aware of these rulers of darkness? The only way I'm aware of them is to see them having their influence on a person who very obviously is in the realm of darkness because of the profanity they use, because of the lies that they tell, because of the kind of life they live. So I know, okay, what accounts for you being the person you are? Are you letting the Holy Spirit guide you? Are you letting evil spirits guide you? Now, folks, it's going to be one or the other. But there are forces. What are these forces doing? Where do they work? They work in our minds. They work in our hearts. They stimulate our feelings. They arouse our interest in things that are good or bad. So, what prompted me to do that? How many times have you heard somebody say, well, the devil made me do that? Could very well be. If it was something bad, you can be sure it's probably the devils that did that. But the problem is, God intends for us to have the strength to allow His Spirit to override the spirit of the evil one so that you cannot use that as an excuse. And certainly, Christians cannot use that as an excuse. Does this make any sense to you? Anyhow, this is what happened in the first year of Darius. Now, these evil spirits were controlling the powers that be at that time in government. And God's angels are sent there to try to change the mind. Now, did Darius have a change of mind with regard to what he had done in signing a decree that he really hadn't considered the ramifications of signing it? Yeah, he sure did. In fact, he lost sleep one night. Who do you think caused him to lose that sleep? I think that the angel is still working on him and saying, listen, you better be more careful, you better be more careful, you shouldn't have allowed this to happen. And, he could hardly wait till the sun rose. He went immediately to the place where the den was and called out to Daniel. Boy, did he breathe a sigh of relief. And did he realize that there are forces unknown to him that were working and brought about the result that God wanted to have? without the king doing anything about it. The king's the one that got him in trouble. Now, should this have an impression upon the king? Yes, it should. What's that impression? It should say to the king, listen, you better be careful what you sign. And you better realize that this man Daniel is the kind of man you think he is. And these other two guys, you may have thought pretty highly of them, but forget about it. You and those other two guys may be worshiping a pagan god, but look at what the one who worships the true God is really doing. So he's having a witness. And sometimes we don't realize how important that is, but it is very important. So in explaining what was written for us back in chapters 8 and 9, this chapter is going to say the same thing in real minute detail. And so what we're talking about here is in the first, he says, I want you to know we were at work 2 years ago. And now here I am working again. And we're still having trouble. And we're still trying to influence the powers that be. Now, of course, back in the first year, what were they trying to do? They were trying to get the powers that be not only to take full control of Babylon, but also to send the captives back. You don't need these captives. That's part of Babylon's situation. You send them back. Now, who's in control? God is. How do we know that? Because God said through Jeremiah, before they ever began to have captivity, it's going to last how long? 70 years. That's in black and white. And Daniel had read that. Now, the angel's recalling to Daniel what he knew 2 years earlier. And he's saying, you know, we were working on that. And it actually worked out, Daniel. I just want you to know, be patient with us. We're working at this. We're going to try to get it all to come to pass. So this is a very important verse that really fits in with the last chapter, but it is introducing here this chapter also. So I guess that's all I'm going to say about that one. Let's go to verse 2. You didn't have any questions to answer there. So, verse 2. And now I, and who is I here?
Okay.
It's the angel. All right. I will tell you. Who's he talking to? Daniel. The truth. Now, where's the truth come from?
The Lord.
That's right. So he said, I have a message from God for you, Daniel. So listen carefully. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. You've already got a king, but you're going to have 3 more. Then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. And as soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. In other words, this 4th guy is going to be a little bit too greedy. And his greed is going to so antagonize the Greeks that he's trying to take over completely that they're going to revolt. And they do revolt. And they revolt in the person of Alexander the Great. And that what leads to the downfall of Persia. So all this is very important as we see it unfolds in history. Now, who are the 3 kings? Notice I've written it here in verse 2. The angel informs Daniel that there will be more kings in Persia that will follow Cyrus. The 3 more kings refer to Cambyses, 530 to 522. Smyrtus, 522 BC, just a short reign. Darius the Great, this is a different one, 521 to 496. Then a 4th, King Xerxes, 486 to 465. He's the guy that's going to be rich. He's the guy that's going to bite off more than he can chew. He's also known as Ahasuerus. Now, when we get to the book of Esther, right after this book, a week or 2 now, we're going to get in the book of Esther. He's the king. He's the last one. King Ahasuerus. So that's the same as Xerxes. 2 different names. That's what makes some of this history really hard to understand. Sometimes they're called Antiochus IV, and other times they'll be called Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, are they 2 different people? No, they're the same person. He's the 4th one, but there were 3 before him, you know. Also known as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. Xerxes will accumulate great wealth and amass an army of 2.5 million. Xerxes was soundly defeated by the Greeks just west of the city of Athens in Salamis. By the way, is Athens in Greece today?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Go about 6 miles west of there, and And that's exactly where this deciding battle took place.
Wow.
It's still on the map today. I looked it up just to make sure. And I wasn't sure exactly. You know, there's another place called Salamis. I thought, it can't be where I think it is. So I thought, okay, this is Greece, so I've got to find it someplace in Greece. I had to look around a number of maps before I finally found a map of Greece where I could say, yeah, there it is. So I figured out how far it was from Athens. Very close. This prompted Alexander the Great in due time to retaliate when he became king of Greece. So in answer to the first question, these three kings are listed there that follow in rapid succession. And then the fourth king will be Xerxes or Ahasuerus. So question number 2, who was the fourth king? Well, I've answered that now. He's the one we just talked about, and you have the answer there in your notes. Number 3, did the fourth king arouse the whole empire against Greece? Yes, it did. In fact, it particularly infuriated Alexander the Great. And he was the first king of Greece. And he's the one that decides, I'm not going to take this any longer. So because of the Persian oppression of the people, he rose up, mustered an army, and actually invaded the Persian territory and in the 4th century BC, and was able to win the world, the then known world, for Greece at that time. So in your notes, I have indicated there, by 330 he had conquered Persia. In 323, this is BC of course, he was dead, and in time his kingdom would be divided in 4 parts. We talked about that before. Now, verse 3. And a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority, and do as he pleases. Now, who do you think this mighty king who's going to do what he thinks he wants to do, and he's going to get it all done very well?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. Yeah. Nothing's going to stand in his way. He's going to accomplish however he needs to do it. He's going to be very daring in what he tries, but he will get the job accomplished. He has gone down in history as the man we know as Alexander the Great. By the year 323, he was dead. And the kingdom would be divided into 4 parts. Now that division into 4 parts is not going to happen within a month. It's going to take a little longer some places and other places. The person who's in charge in Egypt is going to be in charge sooner than the person who's in charge up in Syria. But ultimately, there will be 4 people that will be in charge of what once was under the charge of Alexander the Great. Now, verse 4. But as soon as he had arisen, now who's he that had arisen? Alexander the Great. His kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass. So these 4 points of the compass are made very clear. Notice I've listed them for you under verse 4 there. Cassandra ruled Macedonia. Where's Macedonia? Northern Greece, that's right. Greece is actually, in Bible days, divided into a northern and southern part. The southern part's called Achaia. That's down where Athens is. That's down where Corinth is. But Macedonia is up where Philippi is, where Thessalonica is, where Berea is. All these are seen in the book of Acts. But Macedonia was the northern part, and Achaia was the southern part. But they're all a part of the country we know as Greece. Now, Lysimachus ruled Thrace in Asia Minor. Now, when you talk about Asia Minor, we're talking about Turkey. We're talking about the western portion of Turkey. By the way, what other book in the Bible becomes very important in understanding Asia Minor?
The Journeys of Paul.
Well, that's true. And Revelation.
Oh.
That's where the 7 churches in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 are located, in Asia Minor. That's in Turkey today. You know, this is where Ephesus and Laodicea, that's the first and last. Between them, you have these other 5 that are listed there. Now, Thrace is north of and east of Macedonia. So as you go north in Greece to Macedonia, and then on over toward the country of what we know as Turkey, that area that bridges the gap between Macedonia or Macedon and Asia Minor would be Thrace. Seleucus would rule Syria and Babylonia. Now Syria is what direction from Palestine, from Israel today?
West.
Both, northwest, yeah. Lebanon is immediately north, but north and west, right. That's Syria. And you go on even further west and you come to Babylon. So Syria conquered is that area where it is today. And then Ptolemy ruled in Egypt. That would be to the south. So these are the four directions he's talking there. So in verse 4, as soon as he had risen, his kingdom will be broken and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants. Now, by the way, have we answered question number 1 sufficiently for you? How does history explain what is predicted in this verse?
Oh, yes.
All right, so you've got that written down, so you don't have to write it down now if you don't want to, but just wanted to make sure of that. Now, when it says in question number 2, did Alexander's successors rule with authority once wielded by Alexander himself?
No.
No, because they only had a part of it. Alexander was the great one, but the others have just a part of it. Now, what is suggested by the word uprooted?
Well,
His sovereignty would be uprooted and given to others beside them. Yeah, it just simply means that a division is going to take place in the world power. And so you're going to have Macedon, and you're going to have Thrace, and you're going to have Asia Minor, and you're going to have Egypt. So that's the dividing or the uprooting of what was once one great world power, but it's going to be all divided up now. Verse 5, then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His dominion will be a great dominion indeed. Now, why do the Ptolemaic and Seleucid kingdoms receive special attention to this prophecy? Well, you know where Syria is up here. Here's Egypt down here. What's in between?
Palestine.
And who lives there?
The Jews.
And who are they?
God's people.
They're God's people. These are pagans on either side. Who's going to get them? They both want them. And they're going to battle back and forth and back and forth. And at one time it's going to look like one power is stronger than the other. And finally, who does get them? The northern power.
Yeah.
The northern power ends up being the stronger of the two and gains control of Palestine between. But this is where history now, in the book of Daniel and in this chapter, is going to pay most attention. We're not going to give attention back over to Greece and to Thrace and to Asia Minor. We're going to pay attention up here to Syria and to Egypt. The Ptolemies in the south and Syria, Seleucids in the north. So, who was the king of the south? Well, his name is Ptolemy Soter. Now, he was one of Alexander's generals. So, you can look over there on the back side of this sheet now and see how that fits in. Now, who is one of his princes who will gain ascendancy over him? Well, this is Seleucus I Nicator. Let me just read what I've written out here. You can follow along as I read it. Seleucus and Ptolemy received special attention in the rest of this chapter because the land of the Jews is between the two powers of Syria and Egypt. Ptolemy Soter, one of Alexander's generals, was king of the south. That's Egypt. Seleucus Nicator, one of Ptolemy's generals, gained rule of Syria with Ptolemy's help in 312 BC. Now, pay attention to that second line there, that last line there. Seleucus Nicator, one of Ptolemy's generals. Where's Ptolemy, north or south? South. But one of his generals is going to break away from him. But he's going to have the help of the south in doing so. And he's going to decide, I'm just going to stay up here, and I'm going to rule this part. And so there's where the fourth part then comes in. So you have, at a time that, what I said a moment ago is being emphasized in this verse, the specific areas of these four that took over the place of Alexander the Great is coming not just within a week or two or a month or two. In just a few short years it's going to happen. And this is when it happens. And this is verified in history that is being talked about here in this fifth verse. We answered number 3. The one of his princes who will gain ascendancy is Seleucus I, Nicanor. Number 4, how are we to understand his domain will be a great dominion indeed, because he became the most successful of all those who ruled over what once was ruled over by Alexander. So the 4 people, the 4 land divisions, which of these 4 land divisions are we now saying is receiving the greatest attention because of its greatness of power?
South.
No.
Oh.
Syria.
Oh, Syria.
Syria, right. Seleucus.
Oh, okay.
He became the most successful of those who controlled Alexander's old realm. So I have that written down there in your notes under question number 5, verse number 5 rather. This Seleucus will be a great dominion indeed, is verified by actual historical fact. Now verse 6. After some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. In short, this is a political marriage. One king is going to give his daughter to the other king, and hopefully this will be a way of saying, okay, let's get along together, because I'm giving my daughter to your son to marry, or to you to marry, as the case may be. So after some years they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, as well as he who supported her in those times. Now, how does history explain this verse? First of all, let me read to you what you have in your notes, the notes you had originally. You do have notes that have that written out, don't you?
Yeah.
It says about 250. Okay.
Yeah.
About 250, Ptolemy II attempted to ally himself with the Seleucid Empire by marrying his daughter, that's the daughter of the south, her name is Bernice, to Antiochus II Theos, who had divorced his wife Leotis. This gets real tangled. After 2 years, this marriage failed. Antiochus II went back to Leotis, who then had him killed, along with his son by Bernice. Bernice herself and a number of her Egyptian attendants. Bernice was not able to retain her power against her rival, Leotis. Now, turn to this sheet at the bottom of this page. It's not your notes, but they just hand out to you. Let me read verse 6 again. I'm doing this over again because sometimes we read the second time, word a little differently, it may come out clearer. After some years, that's about 250 BC, I want you to know that everything here is in parentheses. I've added in there. So the part that's not in parentheses is quotation. That's the Bible. So I'm explaining verse by phrase by phrase and word by word. After some years, about 250 BC, they, that is Egypt, and Syria, will form an alliance, and the daughter, Bernice, of the king of the south, who is Ptolemy II, will come to the king of the north, who is Antiochus II, to carry out a peaceful arrangement. So the effort from the south is made with the north. Let's live at peace together. You have your area, I have my area. Now this is a real challenge because what lies between these two powers?
Palestine.
The Jews, that's right. They both want it. And that's going to be a bone of contention until this is finally resolved. That's going to take years. But she, that is Bernice, will not retain her position of power. Why? Because Antiochus II, 2 years later, will take Leotis back as his wife. So this arranged marriage for political purposes is going to end after 2 years. And the separation that took place to make this marriage possible is now going to be restored. Antiochus II, 2 years later, will take Leotis back as his wife. Nor will he remain with his power. Why? He will not remain in power because Leotis will poison him. Because she's afraid he's going to change his mind again and go back to Bernice. That's exactly right. And this is a preview of coming attractions. What happens when a divorce takes place? Isn't it always easier for the second and the third and the fourth to happen? And so many times it does. That's exactly what's happening here. And you think, okay, if this person could get along with you, is the next person going to get along with you? And especially if you go back and think, wait a minute, do I want to play this game? And she says, I'm not going to play this game with you. I'm just going to kill him. So she does. Poisons him. So he won't change his mind, go back to Bernice. But she will be given up. In other words, Leotis encouraged her son, Seleucus, to murder Bernice and the child that she had under her husband during that time. So we're going to get rid of him too. Along with those who brought her, that a number of Egyptian attendants came along with Bernice. And the one, this is Ptolemy II, who sired her, that is, the father of Bernice, as well as he who supported her in those times. Ptolemy II attempted to ally himself with the Seleucid Empire with the marriage of his daughter to Antiochus II, but divorced his wife Leotis. This is a political marriage. 2 years later, Ptolemy died. At this time, Antiochus II divorced Bernice, took back Leotis to be his wife again. Leotis, afraid of Antiochus II, might again take Bernice, killed her husband, Antiochus II. Leotis encouraged her son Seleucus to murder both Bernice and her child. This action opened the door for Seleucus II to have the throne. This means that Ptolemy II is dead. Antiochus II is dead. Now Seleucus II is king. All this historical data is contained in this one verse. Do you understand why I printed this out for you? I know you're going to have to read this over again. I have to read it several times myself. I'm too old to remember all of these minute details of mixed up marriages. I can't even remember. I won't say anything. Verse 7. But one of the descendants of her line. Now, the descendants of, this is Ptolemy III. Now, this is where you need the backside of the sheet. We'll use that sheet the rest of the day now. One of the descendants, this is Ptolemy III, of her line, that is the line of Bernice, will arise in his place, that is, in place of Ptolemy II, who's now dead. He will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with him and display great strength. Now, does this verse indicate a retaliation for the death of Bernice on the part of Ptolemy III, who is also called Xerxes? I don't know whether that's the way you pronounce it or not. Xerxes, but anyhow, it's spelled out there for you. And of course the answer to this question is yes. So he doesn't like what's happened and the death has taken place. So he's going to try to invade the forces of the north to gain control. and to avenge his sister's death. Verse 8. Also their gods, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, he will take into captivity to Egypt. And he and his part will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Now does a time of peace between the north and the south take place? Yes, it does. And that actually is verified in history. But it's after there had been a little skirmish up there in which there had been some robbery of silver and gold that were taken to Egypt. But then they just kind of lived opposite each other in somewhat of a peace for a period of time. Verse 9. Then the latter, that Seleucus the second, will enter the realm of the king of the south. Who's the king of the south? That's Ptolemy. But he will return to his own land. Now, about 240 BC, Seleucus attempted to invade Egypt. What happened? Well, he was totally defeated. He tried to invade Egypt, but was unable to get the job done. So what does he do? He goes back home. Verse 10. His sons, that is, the sons of Seleucus II, will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them refers to Antiochus the Great, will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to his very fortress. Now, whose sons are mentioned in this verse? Well, the sons in this verse are the sons of Seleucus the second. Seleucus the second. Now, the sons are Seleucus and Antiochus. Seleucus III and Antiochus III. Antiochus III is also called Antiochus the Great. Antiochus the Great, Antiochus III, became king when he was only 18 years of age. Now, you may not understand all of this, and that's all right. I'm just simply wanting you to know that the history that I'm giving you here, and if you have these names down, ever want to study history in detail, refer to this, because the Bible is talking about what history records in ancient history, the records we have. Now, what will the sons do?
Wage war in the north.
Yes, that's right. They invade Palestine and capture part of it, but both of them are interested in capturing the land of Palestine. So they're going to continue to be at odds with each other. Verse 11, the king of the south, which is now Ptolemy the fourth, will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north, who is Antiochus the Great at this time. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. So the latter will raise a great multitude. This is Antiochus the Great at the north, but that multitude is going to be given in the hand of the former, which is Ptolemy the fourth, which is down in Egypt. So the north is going to try to get it, and they're not going to succeed. And Egypt, once again, is going to have the upper hand in the conflict between the north and the south, the Syria and the Egyptian area. Now, what event in history is described in this verse? This is when Ptolemy attacked and defeated Antiochus at Raphia. Raphia is on the border between Israel and Egypt. Now, on today's map, you know where Gaza is?
Mm-hmm.
Gaza's down toward it. Today, when you're in Gaza, if you go south, you're immediately in Egypt. It's right at the borderline. Right at that borderline is where Raphia was. And this is where that battle took place in the southern part of the land of the Jewish people. Verse 12. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. So what happened when Antiochus was defeated at Raphia? He suffered enormous loss. I think I've given you some statements in your notes. The Syrians are reported, the Syrians would be the northern kingdom, to have lost 10,000 infantry, 300 cavalry, 5 elements, and 4,000 lost as prisoners. Ptolemy IV was too much of a playboy to utilize his success to the fullest. He resumed his life of luxury and dissolutions and died in 203 without building up or strengthening his imperial fortifications. Now, I included this in your notes because I want you to realize that this Ptolemy IV is described as a playboy. He had to be encouraged by those who surrounded him to get serious about this and to be persuaded, hey, listen, we can conquer this if you just had the will to do it. So it wasn't because he was such a great king. It's because he's really kind of prodded into it, forced into it. But after he once gains the victory, then he's going to sit back and live in the laps of luxury. You know, once a kid, always a kid. Not always. Verse 13. The king of the south, the king of the north, rather. This is Antiochus the Great. The king of the north will again raise a great multitude, greater than the former. And after an interval of some years, he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now, how long was the interval of some years? Well, history tells us it was 14 years. So an interval of 14 years would pass before Antiochus the Great would once again come down and invade the south. And this time he would do so with the help of others from the west, from over in Macedon. They're going to come and help him. He's going to win this battle. So 13 years after the Battle of Raphia, Antiochus the Great was ready for another attempt to settle the score with the Ptolemies. Verse 14. Now in those times many, and the many here he's talking about are the Jewish people. These are the people that are in between the north and the south. In those times, many of the Jews will rise up against the king, that is the Ptolemy, down in Egypt, king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Whose they will fall down? Well, the Jewish people will fall down. Now, in what way was an effort made to fulfill the vision? Well, the Jews thought that they were fulfilling prophecy by taking sides in this whole thing. It proved to backfire on them. And they're going to suffer the consequences for having done this. Now, Ptolemy IV, who died mysteriously, was succeeded by his infant son, Ptolemy V, who is also called Epiphanes, but not to be confused with Antiochus Epiphanes, who we haven't come to yet. We will come to him. Now, my main point is, just grasp the fact there's a battle going on. It's going back and forth. And the people caught in the middle, sometimes they're thinking, okay, we better join this side. No, we better join that side. And they're wavering. And they ultimately made a wrong mistake when they finally decided, I guess maybe we need to side with the north. Because they side with the north, that's when Antiochus Epiphanes comes along, and he really does them in. All right?
Who is the infant son?
Yes. I want to look at my notes to make sure I tell you correctly.
No, I just couldn't write that.
I understand.
I
Ptolemy IV was the one whose infant son, Ptolemy V. came to the throne.
And Ptolemy the Fourth died under suspicious circumstances? you
Yes, he
said?
did. Yeah. Ptolemy the Fourth died under suspicious, mysterious circumstances, which probably means he was poisoned or somebody murdered him. Nobody knows who or how it happened. But his infant son Ptolemy the Fifth, do I not have that down there for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
verse 13.
I'm glad you asked me. I want to get this down for you as much as we can.
How does that work, infant son? What does that actually mean, replaced by his infant son?
He's next in line. That means the other's gonna have to take charge until he grows up to assume the responsibility.
All right.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's happened several times in history. And it's usually somebody in the family or somebody who's been honored as a
Wasn't
general.
it the
or
one you
consul.
said he was 18 years old? That was way back up there.
That was Seleucus.
That's somebody else, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't know how,
Antiochus
what
the
infant
third.
son means?
I don't know.
Yeah.
This is just the way it's recorded in history. Verse 15. Then the king of the north will come, cast a siege ramp, capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. So, to put it in my kind of language, the north comes down and they're unable to do anything about it. They are not prepared, they're too weak, they're too late to gain strength, and so they just kind of collapse. And the north proves themselves to be the greater of the two powers. So question number one, did the power of the north prove too much for the south? Yes, it did. So, that means the land of Palestine, the Jewish people, are now really under whose control?
South.
North.
Oh,
I understand why you're saying south. It's easy to get them confused. The south seemed to be strong. Then they had a weak king. We talked about him being a playboy. He doesn't take the government seriously. He's just out for a good time, enjoying his power. But the north are taking their role seriously. And they're coming back, and they prove to be the stronger of the two powers. And they continue to prove to be that, as history verifies. Now, in verse 16, but he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land with destruction in his hand. Now, who comes against whom in this verse? This is Antiochus III coming against Ptolemy V. So that's the history of this verse. Antiochus III is the fellow to the north, and Ptolemy V is the one to the south. Verse 17.
And the one in the south married Cleopatra, and the one in the north conquered him? Or he married Cleopatra after?
We haven't come to that yet, have we?
Oh, it's in verse 17. The same people though?
In verse 17, yeah, it's Ptolemy V that did marry Cleopatra, yeah. That's going to be another one of these marriages that enters into the picture. Let's come to verse 17. He, that is Antiochus the Great, I get all these greats mixed up. This is Antiochus the Great. Antiochus the Great. Is the same as Antiochus III. You've got that up there further in your notes. He will set his face to come with power of his whole kingdom, bring with him a proposal of peace, which you will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. And the daughter of women to ruin it turns out to be a lady by the name of Cleopatra. By the way, that's a common name. There'll be more than one Cleopatra to deal with here. Now, how did Antiochus attempt to gain control of Egypt? Well, he attempted to gain control by political means. So he married his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy, who is too young to get married. So this is a marriage that will not really take place until he's old enough to realize what has happened. But it's a prearranged marriage. He was only 7 years of age at the time that she was given to be his wife. But owing to his age, they delayed the marriage for another 5 years. And then at the age of 12, the marriage actually took place. This plan failed because the king who gave his daughter to the new king of the south became so in love with her new husband in the south that she turned against her own father and turned in favor of the south. So this was an effort that backfired. That happens different times in history. They try to accomplish something in one way and it doesn't work out for them. Verse 18. Then he, Antiochus the Great, will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. Now, who is he who will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many? This is Antiochus the Great. So he's going to try to capture Macedon and Greece and Thrace. He's going to look over there and see if we can't gain some of this territory to the west, since he has been unsuccessful in the south. Number 2, who is the commander who will put a stop to his scorn to repay him for it? Well, this is when the Romans begin to step into the picture. And so a Roman general by the name of Scipio, S-C-I-P-I-O. Do I have that down there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He's going to step in and prevent this. So Antiochus IV, his younger son, was taken to Rome as a hostage as a result of Antiochus the Great, Antiochus III, trying to conquer an area where they said, no, you're not going to take us. And in place of conquering them, his own son was taken to Rome as a hostage. Now the Romans that took his son to Rome as a hostage kept him for 12 years. This is going to turn out to be Antiochus Epiphanes. We'll have a lot more to say about.
No wonder he's so mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like father, like son. Huh? Verse 19. So he will turn his face toward the fortress of his own land. He will stumble and fall and be found no more. So who turned his face toward the fortress? This is Antiochus the Great, who returned to Syria, where he was really in power. He was assassinated in 170. In his last days, Antiochus the Great could no longer think of expansion. The best he could do is just simply to hang on to what he had up there in Syria. So he did, until he was put to death. Then in his place, Seleucus IV, one who will arise, will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom, yet within a few days he will be shattered, not though in anger nor in battle. Now the one who succeeds him is Seleucus the Fourth. Seleucus the Fourth. His real second name is Philopater. You have that in your notes. Now, what was the jewel of his kingdom? Well, this is the treasury of Jerusalem. And much of this treasury was in the temple area. Now, what happened within a few days? Well, he died unexpectedly, and most people think that he was probably poisoned by somebody. In his place, verse 21, a despicable person will arise. Now, can you guess who that despicable person is? Yeah, he's going to get all the attention from here on out. Antiochus Epiphanes will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. In other words, he's going to be the next king, but he wasn't appointed to be king. He wasn't elected to be king. He wasn't in line to be king. He's going to make himself the king. He will come at a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Now, what purpose has been served by the first 20 verses of this chapter, and who is this despicable person? The whole purpose in this first part of the chapter has been to show the conflict that's going on between the north and the south. Just a continual conflict back and forth. Ultimately, it's going to lead to the north having a king whose predecessors have not been a good role model for him. He does not rightly belong in the position of a king, but he wants to take over in a position of power, and he wants to exercise that position of power. He gave himself the name Epiphanes. The word Epiphanes means the illustrious one. So he was an egomaniac. And he then reigns from 175 to 164 BC. So it's not his by right of succession. He just simply took it. In other words, he played tricks behind the scene to manipulate whatever needs to be manipulated in order for him to get up to this top position. Was Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes born to the throne? No. He was the brother of the late king, not the son, the brother of the late king. So he took advantage of his relationship, of his political and military confusion that prevailed at that time, and was able to succeed in persuading the people to allow him to have the position that he didn't rightly deserve. Verse 22, the overflowing forces will be flooded away before him. That is, before Epiphanes. In other words, any forces that might have prevented him from receiving the power are not going to prevail. They're just going to be shattered, flooded away, and also the prince of the covenant. Now, when we talk about the covenant, and we'll see this again, who are the people of the covenant?
The Jews.
The Jews, right. So, who would be the head man of the Jews during this period of time? The high priest. The high priest. So, when it talks about the prince of the covenant, he's talking about the high priest at that time. Now, what are the overflowing forces that will be flooded away before him? This refers to the military forces that Epiphanes brought against the Egyptian king. So these are going to not be any problem for him. He's going to be in control. And the prince of the covenant is Onias. Did I not put that down there for you?
That's here.
Yeah. Onias the third, the last godly high priest. He was murdered during this period of time. But he was the last high priest that really was a man who believed in God. And of course, what do we know about the priesthood by the time that Christ came on the scene?
It's pretty crooked.
Pretty crooked, that's right. Corrupt, indeed, certainly was. After an alliance is made with him, oh, wait a minute, we've gone over time. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Lost track of time.
we are into it.
Let's go back to number one. What were the overwhelming forces that will be flooded away before him?
Yeah, this is referring to the military that he had brought against the Egyptian king.
Egypt.
Yeah.
Oh, oh.
So it was the North military power that took over the South. Now he's in charge of that military power.
Against the Ptolemies.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Well, we'll start with verse 23 when we begin next. In the meantime, try not to forget everything you learned.
That class was about
The joke of the day.
It'll be a test next week.
I will try to help you along. We'll review some of this. And
Don't give us a quiz.
I won't.
this would be
No.
the time to do it. Huh?
Even an open book test.
You know, what you have in writing is what I want you to have. We really spent the whole hour just saying one thing, and that is, God is telling you exactly what's going to happen among men in the future. And everything he says, whether you know the name, whether you remember the place, that's not the important thing. The important thing is, though, that anyone that says, hey, this is not true, you can't prove that. Oh, yes, we can. Go back and read the history. And if you check out the history and you read the Bible, there's no contradiction. Now, I would hate to try to explain to somebody the first 200 years of our country. You know, somebody asked me who was the president 10 years ago. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. Would I recognize the name when I saw it? Sure. Was that on the top of my mind? No. But can that information be verified? Yes. And if somebody tells me the number that's going to be attached to the next president, somebody might say, how do you know it's that many numbers? Well, because there are that many people preceding him. Well, how do you know that? I'm going to have to look it up. But is it there in history? Yes, it is. Now, folks, we're leading up to the most important event in all of history. The time of Christ. And from the time of Daniel, I mean, we've gone through about 300 years of history just this 1 hour. And what we've done is just simply identified names with the verses so that whoever he's talking about in this verse, we know the name. So if anyone wants to look it up, they can look it up in secular history and find out, here's the guy we're talking about. What do you learn in history? What does this say about that? And there's no contradiction. It fits. Now to me, that's the important thing. But it took me an hour to say that. To prove it. And yet I have a very kind and wonderful audience. Let's pray. Father in heaven, you're good to us, my. Far beyond our ever expectation. We thank you for your grace and your mercy that enables us to be here. It enables us to have a hope that in spite of everything that's going on in our world around us today, and we all know that it's not good, yet you're in control. You've made that known to us. You've given us prophecy that's yet to be fulfilled. And in light of the fulfillment of every prophecy you've made before our time, that has already been fulfilled in detail, we are made strong in our faith, knowing that everything that is yet to come will happen exactly as you have said in your word. So we live confidently,
not proudly, but confidently, with a strong faith, not because we're smart, but because you are, and because your promises are sure. And we're so grateful for that. So help us to be encouraged by the study of your word, and to realize that even the difficult passages are in essence leaving us with a message that we need and everybody else needs, that you are always right, that your word is dependable. And so help us always to take a firm stand on your word and not be swayed by the words of men, which oftentimes do not turn out to be true. Bless each one of us as we go our separate ways now, I pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you, good people.
Thank you. You bet.